For me personally, my daughter certainly had disadvantages to having autism. I mean, not being able to speak or communicate is a really big deal. And it's still like emotional for me right now because we didn't know if she was thirsty, if she wanted to go outside. She couldn't do any of that. So that disables you from participating and enjoying life.
Back when Roman was young, we noticed that he was not developing properly or on track with his peers. It was becoming very obvious by the age of 2 or 2.5. He was not talking. He had stopped talking, he had stopped eye contact, and then he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, which is basically to say that he was overall not developing properly.
He tried to kick the windows out of the car. He would take his shoes off and hurl them at me from the back seat. He would bang his head, and he would just start screaming and crying and kicking and throwing and biting. And his little sister was sitting next to him, and she'd pat him on the back and she said, "It's okay, Tunter, it's okay." And she would rub his back, and I just looked at the three of us and I just thought, wow, this is our life. This is just what I'm gonna do.
It's been quite a journey for a lot of us moms, and we're exhausted. If you haven't noticed, we're exhausted.
Autism has affected several millions worldwide, mostly children of all races, creeds, and economic backgrounds. Family members, too, have been impacted, resulting in global implications.
A lot of it was just his rages that would come for no apparent reason. He would be fine 1 minute, and if you took something, he would just have a major meltdown.
Sadly, I remember a few of those outrages sometimes, and now that I think about them, some of them were silly, some of them were kind of like, you know, okay, maybe it was warranted but unwarranted. Honestly, when I think back to it, I kind of feel embarrassed, in all honesty.
People would, just taunt him and push his buttons. And I'd say, "Stop that, why are you doing that?" And they're like, "Well, we just like to see his reactions." 7. And then he would explode on them, of course. And I'm like, he has those reactions because he's autistic. He reacts that way because he's autistic. That's like pushing a person out of a wheelchair and laughing at them because they can't get up.
Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition, and it has changed over the years in terms of how we conceptualize it. But generally speaking, it is a condition that you will notice characteristics early on, before the age of 3 oftentimes, although it's sometimes not diagnosed until later.
I would say that autism is fundamentally a broad spectrum of disorders of the brain that result in difficulties in social communication, recognition of cues, and the ability to function in the way you and I would ordinarily function in society.
Autism is also associated with poor posture, motor coordination deficits, gait abnormalities, and lack of proprioception. Autonomic nervous system dysfunction, poor sleep patterns, and gastrointestinal disturbances are also cardinal features of autism spectrum disorder.
Some states have, a higher prevalency, but right now I think it's 1 in 54 is the most recent from the CDC. Autism is an international issue that everyone is facing.
It's not just a problem in the United States. I just came back from Indonesia, and one of my colleagues approached and said she has 500 autism kids in her clinic and doesn't know what to do with them. And I said, so we have a big road ahead of us.
Biohacking Autism refers to the application of science and technology to understand autism's dynamics and nuances, then address and improve the lives of those impacted. At this point, there is no scientific consensus as to autism's origin or root cause, and no standardized treatment exists. But recent research offers hope and possibly a cure.
Historically, kids on the spectrum were treated as psychotic patients and sometimes placed in psychotic institutions, and that wasn't that long ago.
The history of autism as we know it came into the public consciousness around 1911. Swiss psychiatrist Paul Eugen Bleuler coined the term to describe what was believed to be severe cases of childhood schizophrenia. Autism was thought of as a person's inaccessible inner life, where unsatisfying reality was replaced with fantasy.
In the 1940s, it was seen as bad parenting. It was seen as, why is your child misbehaving? It's autism, it's caused by bad parenting. Over the years, there was so much disagreement. So when you go from the 40s all the way through the 80s, it's that you're looking at misdiagnosis.
Autism was thought of as a disorder that couldn't really be treated well. And so individuals maybe ended up in institutions. Historically, it was understood that there was a difference in the brain development. So treatments on the brain were conducted, lobotomies or electroconvulsive shock therapy, to try to adjust and change the child and change how they were functioning.
This view was challenged in the 1960s when British psychologists began to validate child psychology as a science. The eventual closure of institutions, coupled with increased speech therapy services, ushered in a new understanding of autism.
By current definition, autism is a general term for a group of complex developmental conditions, including autism, Asperger's, ADHD, and sensory processing disorders. These conditions are characterized by deficits in social interaction, verbal and nonverbal communication, and repetitive behaviors.
Autism is a developmental disorder. It affects the ability for a child to develop the appropriate skills throughout life to be able to navigate social interactions, to be able to navigate communicative skills. Oftentimes it's associated with repetitive behaviors or restrictive behaviors, so they don't know how to be able to cope or necessarily control their output, their feelings, their response to activities around them.
A lot of the work that I've done in diagnosing individuals on the spectrum, I've noticed that their processing speed is a little bit slower. So it's not that they don't understand what's going on around them. It just may be that they aren't picking up on the cues as fast as others.
The spectrum varies between person to person with multiple classifications.
Diagnosed is usually by a clinician who is qualified, meaning that they've seen lots of different kinds of children and can diagnose autism by some behavioral characteristics. There's no blood test, and so people tend to look for social communication difficulties and then restricted interests, repetitive behaviors, sort of very clear characteristics. I think most people would agree on the characteristics early on of children with autism. Where it gets more complicated is where people are diagnosed later in life.
Autism spectrum disorder describes symptoms in two areas: persistent deficits in social interaction and repetitive patterns of behavior. Because there is no blood test to determine whether someone has autism, there is a deep disagreement among parents and practitioners as to whether it is a disability or simply another normal.
Hayden was pretty advanced when he was a baby. He walked early, talked early. He was learning English, Spanish from the nanny. Very verbal and outgoing child. And then right before he was 2, he just kind of tuned out and regressed and lost
every word and stare off at any light that there was.
By age 2, probably sometime after I was talking, I lost all my words. But by age 3, I had many professionals teach me how to talk again.
I felt like kids with autism were discriminated against because they were in this category that if you got diagnosed with any other mental health disorder or medical issue, you could get coverage. My other daughter had asthma. Oh, no big deal. But for whatever reason, autism was this diagnosis that no insurance companies had coverage for.
Until the last few decades, very little was known about what causes autism. Even now, with technological advances, much remains a mystery. This is because autism is complex and varies tremendously between individuals, age groups, and genders. As a result, there is no consensus on precisely what causes autism.
The difficult answer is we're not 100% sure at this time. There are lots of studies that are looking at the root cause of autism because with so many more kids getting diagnosed on the spectrum, there's so many more questions about why and where does it come from, and parents asking, did I cause this, or what did I do to cause this?
We don't know for certain, but most scientists would agree that it's some interaction between biology and environment. So genetics are involved, biology is involved, the environment to some extent is involved as well. So the root cause, the absolute cause, we're not certain about.
So the root cause of autism is not fully understood. There are approximately 1,000 or more genes that have been associated with autism or with the autism spectrum disorders, but none of them specifically has been found that diagnoses patients with autism. You can have those genes and not have autism. It's also heritable, which means it's passed down to generations. In some cases, there's a higher prevalence of autistic behavior and ASD in families.
There's some research out there to suggest that there is a genetic component. There's also some research out there to suggest that parental age, so older parents, may be more at risk of having a child who's on the spectrum.
So the root cause of autism, I think, is something that it's a moving target. I think that we've gotten better at identifying some of those root causes. The genetic world has started to really piece together a picture of some of those microarrays or genetic combinations that attribute to autism.
While some scientists say genetics is involved, others believe autism is the result of exposure to toxic chemical compounds in the environment, dietary deficiencies, side effects from medications or vaccines, neurovascular inflammation, or even postural imbalances. Finding the trigger has been the elusive holy grail of autism research. But most experts agree the onset of autism symptoms start with a short-circuiting in communications between brain cells during brain development.
I believe that it's related to toxins in the environment that are affecting the neurovascular system, and whether it's heavy metals that we're seeing in the environment that we know that can have neurotoxic effects on our body and in our brains.
One single cause may not be what we're looking for. I think causes of inflammation and severity of the inflammation and the timing of the inflammation is what's going to become more relevant. So again, how the brain got inflamed becomes interesting, but it's inflammation at the core that I think is the cause.
Other experts point to a gut-brain connection. For each individual child, it takes a different set of circumstances to manifest and negatively affect brain development.
The child may be introduced to toxins, environmental toxins, other toxins, and if their microbiota is not perfect, then those toxins cannot be ushered out through the digestive tract the way it should be. Probably the reason that the child manifests autism.
We call it deforestation of the gut flora. And when that happens, you open up that risk that the healthy bacteria can no longer protect the gut, and now the breakdown of the lining occurs, and you get more of this sort of unwanted bacteria now into your bloodstream.
The Global Institute of Probiotics believe these toxins in the digestive system significantly impact the chemical process that normally occurs during digestion, and the child's system becomes overwhelmed and unable to develop normally.
I would say after a long bout of antibiotics, where the beneficial flora is destroyed, the child now has a disrupted microbiota, and that microbiota cannot defend the child against bacteria that may have grown there that are now disruptive, that very delicate engagement with the gut and brain. We don't know if that child was given excessive antibiotics, the health of the mother, if the child was breastfed, what other toxins the child was exposed to in the childhood.
Under inflammatory situations, that barrier that allows those bacteria to stay in your gut is broken down. And that leaky gut allows those bacteria and their toxins to get into the bloodstream. Once it's in the bloodstream, it gets into the brain via the blood-brain barrier. And there's been evidence in some great recent research showing that those toxins then get into the nuclei regions of the cell, of the neuron, and actually prevent gene expression from occurring.
The root cause could be some highly complex combination of internal and external forces acting upon a child's development. Or, as some experts now claim, it could be as simple as bad posture affecting the neurovascular system.
What I've discovered with working with autism is that there is actually something that all these kids share, and that is postural imbalances, motor coordination deficits, lack of proprioception, and gait abnormalities. Therefore, I postulate that the underlying structural issue that leads to the symptomatology associated with autism actually comes from the poor posture.
Still, others point to vaccines. Parents and practitioners are now looking more closely to possibly connect the dots between vaccines and autism, especially after serious side effects have been alleged following administration of COVID-19 vaccines to children.
There's definitely disagreements on the cause of autism because there are still a lot of families that feel like their child started showing symptoms of autism after they were vaccinated. I'm very cautious and careful to discredit anything that a family feels like is their personal experience.
When we look at the number of vaccines that are required, 20 years ago compared to what we're seeing that the requirements are today are so much more, and I feel like that's definitely a factor in why we're seeing this huge increase in autism.
Scientists are sure that shots or vaccinations do not cause autism.
It's an easy one for people to get trapped in, because with vaccinations, when you look at vaccinations, it's about the same time that you're going to catch autism. It's about that age 3 or slightly younger than that time period where, hold on, they just got vaccinated. Now I'm seeing some of these profound symptoms. So our brains play tricks on us.
What we do know is the rise in diagnoses since the 1960s has been phenomenal. An early study in the U.S. reported a rate of 4.5 cases per 10,000 children. But by 2006, the rate was more than 116 cases per 10,000 children in the U.S. and UK. Numbers continue to rise, with some Middle Eastern countries reporting a rate of over 150 cases per 10,000 children in 2019. And now, researchers at Rutgers University show autism diagnosis rates among 8-year-olds nearly tripled in the New York, New Jersey metro area from 2000 to 2016.
We're noting an increase in the numbers identified in westernized countries, definitely because of access to services. So we definitely see more children with autism, and it's likely a combination of sort of throwing the net wider on the diagnostic process. So we're picking up children who were probably more mild in their symptomatology that we might have missed earlier on.
I realized that as the decades went forward, more people were being afflicted with these problems and more disturbance in the microbiota was happening. Not just for autism, I'm talking about for massive digestive disorders that we see now, and the digestive disorders are rising. So we need to really focus on all of that because let me tell you, autism is not that different from inflammatory bowel disease, from Crohn's or colitis. It's just a different manifestation in the child.
Because autism manifests differently in different people, there are unique challenges for each individual.
Hunter was now about 7, and we were seeing another child psychiatrist and therapist. Hunter was in his office and touching everything on his desk, and he was a child psychiatrist, and he was like, don't touch that, don't touch that. And I thought, oh my God, what are you doing?
I still sometimes feel like people don't really understand me, or like they're, choosing to ignore my problems over their own. And it can feel a little bit difficult, but I just try to keep positive and just remember that the process is slow.
I think the hardest part of being the non-autistic sibling is that you are so painfully aware of how people were making fun of him. And I know exactly how they're doing it, but maybe he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand exactly how they're making fun of him. And they don't understand exactly how cruel it is.
And then Hunter would tell me all the time, I love you, like 100 times a day. And the doctor said, well, that's a tic, and we can fix that. And I just thought, oh God, no. I looked at him, I said, that's the only good thing that's happening right now. Please don't take that away.
Most options only aim to reduce symptoms that interfere with quality of life and daily functioning.
When you have a condition like autism where there isn't a clear path forward in terms of interventions or help or just answers to questions, that parents go to social media, they go to the internet for help. And so I think it can be very confusing for parents because there isn't a definitive intervention.
During that time period between the 40s and the 60s, saw brain surgery, lobotomies being done as a corrective, which is absolutely wrong. Because what you're looking with autism is how can we empower them to learn and develop appropriately. We're not changing a child, we're trying to empower them with skills.
So one thing we know is that there's not a single intervention that all individuals with autism will respond to in the same way. So that means that there's not a single effective intervention. There are many effective interventions, and a different question, and one that we try to follow in our research, is to think about which intervention at which time does this individual need.
Intervention options tend to involve multiple professionals and are delivered in educational, health, community, and in-home settings. One of the most popular procedures is called Applied Behavior Analysis, or ABA. It enhances the child's social skills, but does not necessarily deal with the root cause.
So autistic disorder, if you think of a 2-year-old who has some maladaptive behaviors, is that they need something like applied behavior analysis, which is the gold standard for treatment, embedded in all their programming, because as they learn these new skills, whether it's from a speech pathologist, they need to practice it and feel the benefit of it paying off.
ABA is a treatment that is designed to focus on reinforcing positive behaviors. And the idea is not to have a child engage in any rote response over and over and over again. What we want is the child to learn how to respond appropriately to get their needs met.
That gets to the heart of that gold standard of practice, which is ABA. ABA is an intensive treatment. It takes into effect that I'm going to continue to practice these new skills. I'm not changing a child, but I'm empowering them to see the value of some of these behaviors that might be more beneficial to them. So that's the gold standard.
One of the controversies is really changing the person or helping that person live their best life. And I think we're all thinking about how to help that person live their best life. We're not trying to extinguish the uniqueness of autism, but where there's the struggles and the unhappiness and the difficulties. We want to help people.
When Roman was young, probably 5 years old, we got accepted to the UCLA Early Intervention Program, which everybody was just dying to get into, right? And just the kindest people and so nice. But it was an ABA therapy program. And one of the things they made you do was look through a mirror to watch your child all day. But you were also watching 10 other kids. And you could see there was a lot of commonalities among the children.
The kids themselves are terrific. I mean, one of the things about working in the field is that you get to know lots of different individuals and families, and they're unique, and so the goal is to really help that person live their best life.
In that program, we met 10 other mothers in the same boat. And we all keep in touch, still to this day, 10 years later. And some of the common things we find are gut dysbiosis, which is basically, the gut's just a mess. They're not, most of them are either have diarrhea or they're constipated, but it's a big issue.
In our clinic, what we oftentimes see in patients on the spectrum is a host of GI disturbances. It's almost uniform across the whole host of these kids that they have some form of GI disturbance, either crampy bowel or a difficulty with normal passage of food.
If you have developed an allergy to wheat protein, which is gluten, as you hear it all the time, that I have got gluten allergy or I've got milk allergy, milk protein allergy, those proteins are not supposed to cross the gut and get into the brain. But when that happens, the gut becomes leaky, and these molecules are able to cross over into the bloodstream and then get inside the brain and cause inflammation.
These observations and others have resulted in various research developments. One study looks at diet and gut morphology and its impact on the development of brain cells called neurons. Neurons send signals of all kinds throughout the body and receive sensory signals sent to the brain.
I was the first one to say that all problems in the body have their origin in the gut. Remember, the gut is your tube that allows everything from the outside in. So before you attempt the other treatments, I believe a diet and proper probiotic supplementation would benefit the child.
A lot of the psychiatric disorders often carry inflammation as a component of their presentation. Depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, autism spectrum disorders, all of them are associated with some form of an effect on the gut. And the leaky gut in itself might increase the brain inflammation. And this is a common theme amongst all of these disorders.
As an expert in the field of probiotics for the last 54 years, I have seen that the gut issues, if not resolved, do affect mood, do affect how we think, how we behave. And I believe our way forward is to first fix the gut and the digestion, because we need to establish that communication of the beneficial probiotic microbiota with the brain so that the child can function more optimally.
Another promising avenue looks at deficiencies of the neurovascular system, which appears to be a common denominator among autistic children.
By addressing poor posture and correcting it, and motor coordination deficits, by improving these core areas, what I've found is that verbal and nonverbal communication improve, repetitive behaviors improve, and social interaction improves. So once the nervous system was back in balance, the interpreting center in the brain could integrate the incoming information and therefore produce the correct output.
I call it resetting the nervous system is what I call it when I talk about it to other people. Kind of like resetting his whole nervous system, it would go down his whole body and he would just come out of there so calm and different. So I knew it was working.
So at 9 years old, he was still wetting the bed every single night and having accidents during the day. It wasn't just wetting the bed, it was flooding the bed, which means something is medically not right, and a million doctors couldn't tell me what it was. Missy works on him for 6 months, and the bedwetting stops. So you're onto something. And there's just a lot of other things that basically started to resolve or get better.
I had kids that went from not being potty trained to, after 2 appointments, being potty trained at the age of 6. I also had children that were completely nonverbal at age 6 who started talking after the 3rd appointment.
When Missy came along, she explained how it affected the nervous system. And so I said, you know what, let's try this out, because it made a lot of sense to me. So we went, and within the first session, he was laying backwards on her, relaxed and as calm as can be, and he just came out of there really relaxed and happy.
I think her treatment is excellent. So smooth, and when it's in the pool, it's even better.
At the end of the day, for me, it's been a game changer.
I had a doctor who investigated my results, and I also had a nurse practitioner who came in and observed throughout the study.
At the end of the study, what we had found, we worked with 6 kids over a course of 6 weeks. It was fascinating to see, on average, the improvement was about 20 to 30% across the board, but one of the most significant improvements was eye contact. We would see an improvement from like 20 to 30%, up to even 40% improvement in eye contact, which was one of the things I found the most fascinating, because at first these kids weren't even looking at me.
They were sleeping better, they were talking better, they were socially interacting with peers, they were asking questions. They could express their wants and needs, and a child that talked incessantly and could not sit down in his desk was now starting to get straight A's in school, which was one of the most important things for me.
If I had my way, I would just live with Missy for 3 months, and we just did everything every day, all the time, that Roman would be done with autism. I actually believe that. This is me.
Other alternatives are available, ranging from hallucinogenic drugs to stem cell therapy. Even neurofeedback procedures and other non-medicated neurological methods.
Neurofeedback really uses, again, sophisticated neurotechnology that allows the brain to be modulated into favorable brain waves. The software reads the brainwave activity and provides the feedback while a person is watching a movie or a game and so forth. And during this period of time, their brainwave is getting modulated to favorable systems and could be basically modulated without the use of medications and without any side effects.
These procedures have been shown to reduce inflammation of the brain in order to calm autistic symptoms, so other forms of therapy or training can be implemented.
The brain is not supposed to be inflamed. It is not supposed to become red, so to say. And how does the brain manifest itself in terms of its behavior? It changes its electrical activity. So these brain waves get affected when the brain is inflamed. And so you may have more or less of a particular brainwave activity, and that manifests itself in behaviors such as anxious behaviors, not making eye contact, etc.
So you can talk about all the reasons why the waves aren't working, why there's inflammation, why we have a disruption of the brain. We call it a brain arrhythmia. And in my view, we absolutely have seen some success with our personalized form of TMS, repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, just where we look at the brainwave pattern by an electroencephalogram, and then we lightly stimulate the brain at various locations, trying to realign the brainwave pattern.
So there are some other treatments that individuals are exploring. Parents are desperate. They're really looking for answers and trying to find ways to help their child.
So in our experience so far, we have approximately 10,000 patients that have had PRTMS, personalized RTMS. And in that group, there may be 200 to 300 kids with autism that we've treated over the last 7-8 years. And we've been changing our processes along the way, trying to find the best algorithms to use to get the best results. If you do that, we've watched quite a bit of amazing manifestations change in kids.
Since we have a nuanced understanding that certain electrical activities in the brain are more of a pattern in autism spectrum disorders, then we could use certain specific forms of transcranial magnetic stimulation, which are more guided, in order to modulate the brainwave activity. We could also use neurofeedback, because neurofeedback provides, again, the modulation of the brainwave activity, and that could also favorably influence the behaviors.
Cutting-edge research to biohack autism utilizes new technologies in clinical trials to better understand what is effective and appropriate to improve conditions for autistic individuals. It is being suggested that new medical treatments will supplement rather than replace behavioral and educational therapies.
So some of the studies are looking deeper into the genetic component to identify more clearly and be able to maybe identify more clearly at birth or in utero, is there a potential that the child will be on the spectrum?
The push is to understand the underlying biology of autism, then use scientific advances to more efficiently address symptoms.
Some of the other studies that are being done are MRI studies that are looking at brain development and what areas of the brain are impacted. So is it the sensory area of the brain, the area of the brain that focuses on vision or that focuses on touch?
To further understand brain development and dysfunction, it is helpful to look at brain cell research that has occurred in the field of regenerative medicine, including stem cell therapy.
Everybody has heard the term stem cells, and there's a definition for what a stem cell is. It's a cell that can regenerate itself, it makes more copies of itself, and it can give rise to some kind of adult tissue. There are stem cells that live in our bodies that do exactly that. They make more copies of themselves than they make, if they're in your brain, they can make some more neurons. We're also working on therapies for multiple sclerosis, which are stem cell based, and we are working on autism, which is really challenging.
By looking at normally developed brain neurons in comparison to brain neurons impacted by autism, treatments could theoretically involve implanting normal brain neurons and other cells grown via stem cell therapy to replace damaged cells.
I'm not guaranteeing there will be a stem cell therapy, but we can study autism, the development of the brain from autistic brain in a culture dish, because we can take skin cells from people who have autism. We can put those cells into a culture dish, and we can make the brain cells develop in a culture dish. We can find out what's wrong. We can figure out how to fix it. So these are early days, but you can imagine the uses for this kind of stem cell on autism are only limited by our imaginations.
Another avenue of brain research is looking at the relationship between gut and diet and that connection with brain development.
I think they said something like 20 or 30% of kids with autism have seizure disorders, and the life expectancy is very low for them. And it's usually the seizure that gets them. Throwing pharmaceuticals at a seizure disorder does not work. And I think part of it is you're just distracting with the pill and not taking care of the gut or anything else that's probably causing the seizures, or the mold or whatever it is that's really truly causing it. So these days, I think a lot of doctors are on it.
I've seen enough. They've run probiotic trials. It helps the children, but then there's no repetition, there's no standardization, there's no specific processes for each child. And that's what I want to do. I think that is the future for not only solving autism problems, but solving all gut-brain issues combined.
A large-scale clinical study with up to 300 autistic children has begun regarding the effects of probiotics. It is hoped this study might reveal the gut-brain connection.
I think the good news is that we're finally at the point where we can start combining these novel therapies. So I'm really excited to see us go forward with this observational study we're doing, which will do this very thing, take a population of kids that are autistic and at high risk, just give them a probiotic regimen, which will be designed for them, followed by a simulation of the brain over a period of 8 to 12 weeks.
We're trying to establish the most optimal beneficial microbiota composition for each child. Each person has a significant original microbiota composition that's unique to them, like their fingerprint. So just throwing in something else that somebody else has may not fix that microbiota composition, and some child may have a greater compromise of their microbiota composition than another child.
It would actually be very naive, scientifically speaking, if we were to say that everybody is going to get a cookie-cutter treatment. And that is why today's world is going to be the world of personalized genomics and personalized medicine. And that would apply to autism as well, because we are going to be able to test for the leaky gut and the microbiome testing, and then modulate that microbiome so that their gut issues are also taken care of. So this is a very exciting time where we may be able to alter and modulate all of that.
Numerous small-scale clinical studies with autistic children have been conducted on a wide variety of their biology. One of the most surprising has looked at the neurovascular system and posture.
I did a study in Los Angeles in 2018, and I had 6 children that participated in the Los Angeles study.
This trial was so successful, researchers immediately set out to duplicate the results with a different team of investigators and autistic children.
In order to show that my results could be duplicated, I had trained a woman in Paris who agreed to conduct a study on her own.
L'étude pilote NVT s'adresse à des enfants ayant des troubles autistiques. Ces enfants sont âgés de 4 à 12 ans et sont venus 2 fois par semaine pendant 3 mois. Le traitement NVT est un traitement qui associe 3 actions. Un traitement corporel, ils reçoivent un massage, il y a une réelle absorption maintenant au bout de 3 mois. Je vois chez tous de nettes améliorations, un confort physique, un apaisement, un traitement postural et une meilleure appropriation de leur corps, de leur relation à leur corps, sur moins obsessionnel, avec plus d'expression affective et un traitement par des minéraux.
Ils jettent les choses, ils tapent.
Oui.
Qui est déjà moins agressive. Oui, oui. Les câlins sont plus longs.
Des jeux répétitifs tout le temps. Il était à faire de la stéréotypie. Sur la concentration, il arrive à travailler pendant 1 heure d'affilée, ce qui n'était pas pensable en début d'année. Sa qualité de présence dans la relation s'affine.
She was able to duplicate my results, and the children had tremendous relief of the symptoms associated with autism. Most had improvements in social interaction, verbal and nonverbal communication, and repetitive behaviors. It was a great success in Paris.
These studies and others like them may lead to actual treatments and potentially cures for some, as much medical research continues its efforts to biohack autism.
These are relatively newer fields in science, and there has been tremendous advancement in a short period of time, given the fact that most psychiatric disorders have taken centuries before we came down to understanding it. So this is the promise of the decade of the brain in terms of how many tools we have, from neuroimaging to quantitative EEG to the gut-brain testing and so forth, that today we have greater promise of coming down to understanding what the root cause of autism are.
With high-profile people like Elon Musk publicly discussing their experiences, the stigma of autism has been softened, and parents of autistic kids with access to significant resources are rapidly becoming their own advocates on behalf of their children.
My hope is over the next 5 years that we really are focusing and ensuring that the services that kids are getting has the highest quality for the best outcomes. Because we know that kids with autism can make tremendous progress. I've seen it.
My girlfriend always says, if I had the lottery, I would hire all the best doctors we know, and I would lock them in a hotel conference room for 3 days and tell them just to talk to each other and figure this out. Because part of the problem is they go to conferences and the doctors talk to each other, but it's like every kid's a little different, everybody's discovering something new, and everybody does think that theirs is it. In our opinion, they're not talking to each other enough.
5 years ago, we didn't really know much about the causes of autism. There was a lot of questions and controversy about vaccines and diet. But in the next 5 years, I see the research really improving, narrowing down, focusing, being based a lot more in science, and being able to answer some of those questions for families so that they know how their child will function, they'll know how to support their child.
While researchers continue their search for a cure, others argue a cure is not the answer, at least in the short term.
I think Hunter is who he is because of his autism. That's just who he is. I can't, wanting a cure to his autism would be like wanting a cure to him, and I don't want him gone. I love my brother. I love the way he is, and I love the way he talks and sees the world. I want a cure to the way people treat him. That's what I want the cure to.
Since autism is complicated, unraveling the clues could take decades. They argue time is better spent helping people live with autism. But plenty of discoveries encourage the fight on both fronts.
I'm originally from the Balkans, was born in Yugoslavia. When my parents came to this country, they had not heard of half the diseases that people were talking about here, and that was in the 1950s. So that has expanded exponentially, and I do believe that with a true mind and a true heart, you can find a solution to every problem. You just have to apply yourself.
I think in the few years from now, we are going to look at several methods that are going to essentially address some of the core symptoms that cause functional impairment in an individual, and also several aspects that could help us prevent this increased amount of diagnosis and increased rise in overall autism spectrum disorders, because we're going to be addressing prevention, diagnosis, and treatment at the same time in a very strong manner. So I would leave this discussion with a message of tremendous hope.
So what I'm hoping to all of these parents and families who are suffering from the symptoms associated with autism, I think the future is extremely bright. With all of the research moving in the right direction, in order to solve a problem, you first have to identify the problem. And I think that the research is going in that direction. And therefore, these kids are not only going to be able to gain their independence back, but they're going to feel better overall. So I have tremendous hope for the future.
So I guess the point is they're getting there, and hopefully they could just get there sooner, like yesterday. That would be amazing, because it's been quite a journey for a lot of us moms, and we're exhausted. If you haven't noticed, we're exhausted.
And so I would just say, don't give up. It's really hard, but don't give up. And if you need help, that's what we're all here for.
Hunter, he was barely intellectually functional, but that's okay because we're all here for you. And so Hunter now has graduated from high school. He goes to UC Irvine.
Now that I look at it, it's really impressive just how far I've really come from being this kid who could barely spell correctly or read, having to have all these people, shadow me because of my autism, to being this independent young man who can do essays at a college level and make relationships with people.
And so Hunter has always just embraced who he is. So the inspirational thing I give to you is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that you can't let your kid be defined at 3 on what the future says they're going to be. You have to just follow your kid's dream and take some inspiration from them and just help them be who they are going to be.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Please don't take it.
Much more remains to be discovered, but now a sense of urgency in biohacking autism has emerged, some of which is directed toward prevention or readiness. And the more we learn, the closer we get to being ready and being within reach of the holy grail of autism, where every autistic individual can live a happy, healthy life and pursue a prosperous future.
Live the life you think you should. Be yourself, no matter what they say. Personality will shine through. See the world in your own way. Yeah. Live the life the way you should. Be yourself, no matter what they say. The world you see can be dark for you. Your personality